Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Evening with Germanna Virtual Lecture Series. Today, we are going to be doing our annual archaeology recap, so going over everything we've done in the past 2025 dig season. But before we get underway, a few housekeeping items. First and foremost, as always, we have to express a heartfelt thanks to all of our generous Sustainer Circle supporters, many of whom are listed on the screen right now. It's thanks to your support that we're able to do programs like this that are free to little cost, and we can only keep doing them with your support. So thank you to everybody on this list and more, and people who have supported us throughout the years. This event will be recorded, so it'll be available to view later if you so choose. We'll upload it to our Vimeo probably next week sometime. And then also, if you have any questions, feel free to put that in the Q&A section or drop that in the chat, and we will address those at the end of the different presentations. We're going to go through a couple of different separate presentations from each of our staff members, and once we're finally done, we'll recap and we'll answer all of the questions together. But if you have a question at any point or you have technical difficulties, drop a message in the chat and I'll do my best to address that. Otherwise, without any further ado, I'm happy to introduce Germanna's newest Director of Archaeology and Cultural Resources, Kelly Arford Horn, to kick us off tonight. And I will stop sharing my screen.
All right, thank you, Shannon. Okay, so as Shannon said, the first thing I want to talk about is our big announcement that I think probably many of you have already heard, and that is the big news that Dr. Eric Larsen is moving on to new adventures and leaving Germanna. This is good news for him. He will no longer be commuting on Interstate 95 for 3 hours or more a day. We are very excited for the positive effect this will have on both his mental and physical health. I have had the pleasure of working with Eric for the past 5.5 years. Eric and I have a similar approach to how and why we do our work, and we have spent many hours in the lab talking about how we can do meaningful archaeology. So I am honored to be taking over the role of Director of Archaeology and continuing with this amazing program that Eric started from scratch in 2014. So Eric's last official day was yesterday, but we managed to convince him to join us for a few more minutes and reflect upon his time with Germanna. So with that, I am going to pass things over to Eric.
Thank you, Kelly. It's been kind of a melancholy day for me today. In a way, I poured myself a cup of tea when I normally am getting in the car, and that was a little bit of a celebration. But then, it also felt strange. Um, it's been a time of reflection for me, and in a way, I think that's appropriate for setting this evening up. Let's talk about sort of what archaeology at Germanna and Germanna sites has been. I think Historic Germanna, the organization, the descendant community that sort of created this organization, really helped set up archaeology back in about around 1970, by giving the 100 acres over to Germanna Community College, to the Commonwealth of Virginia, for the creation of Germanna Community College. It was many of the professors who came and took an interest in that local history, that I think kind of pushed people to begin to explore the area and to look for both the fort, the original fort, the first construction by the English during the colonial process, and then later also Spotswood's home, which later became known as the Enchanted Castle. Spotswood's home was easiest to find because it was made of stone and brick. The fort itself, being made out of wood, is a little more ephemeral, harder to locate archaeologically. So the archaeology really, hit the Spotswood's house first, and that's really what kind of kicked things off. a developer in the mid-70s decided that they were going to sort of create a neighborhood out of that space. And it was archaeology that came in and talked that developer out of developing over the area. A second developer came in the mid-80s. And again, the plan was to create a neighborhood in that across that area of the Germanna Peninsula where the Rapidan River goes, bends its way around that large area. Um, and once again, the Commonwealth of Virginia threw archaeologists at it. They did what we call salvage archaeology, literally just taking off the upper layers in order to locate the foundations of the enchanted castle. Um, they were able to do that in a significant enough way and found significant enough items, such as the famous fireback that's now at the Virginia Museum of Culture, the Richmond Museum of Cultural History. Um, uh, uh, they were able to convince the developer to sell off 6 of those plots that he was going to divide, and preserve the land that's still around with us today. University of Mary Washington kind of stepped in as steward for about a 10-year period, and sort of helped continue archaeology. And their focus was really upon the Enchanted Castle house itself. And dug approximately, they tested, let's say, approximately about 30% of that structure of the main house, and learned a lot about the architecture and the nature of that building, and began a collection of artifacts that is still in use today. As is hard with archaeology, the funding ran out in the mid-90s, and Mary Washington wasn't able to do anything further until it was, around 2013 that the Historic Germanna organization asked if they could take over stewardship of that land, since not much was happening with it. And that's kind of what brought me to the organization. In 2014, Historic Germanna hired me to kind of help with the cultural resources is the name for it, that is necessary. They were given a chance to steward the property, and transferred with an easement, which means that the state still has a say as to what happens in the below surface area of the sites. So we don't steward it alone. We actually steward it with the Commonwealth of Virginia today. Um, I was hired on, and the first task that I had to do was to try and sort of settle the work that had been done before. And this was a big task. I've thought about those days again. Back in 2015, we brought in truckloads of clean fill soils, and we regraded across where the excavations had been, in essence, kind of burying the work that had been done by Mary Washington. That seems kind of sad, but we did it in a way, and put tarps down and then put the soils on top of that can be easily reversed. And the idea is that we needed to protect the foundations that were out there, from being eroding away from weather and snows and just weather as a whole. It was in pretty rough shape because it had been untouched for probably almost a 20-year period before we got in there again. That stabilization of the site really kind of gave us notice with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources when we successfully accomplished that. And let me tell you, it was tough. I felt very alone at first, but Historic Germanna garnered resources. I just recently talked to the executive director who was here when I first started, Steve Hine. He kind of created some miracles and helped us get loads of dirt delivered. We were able to sort of get that put into place, and we were able to stabilize the site in that year in 2015. So that when 2016 came around, we actually started talking about, well, is there some way that we can start to do new archaeology? And with that, I proposed working with a friend of mine, Dr. Bernard Reeds, and building a partnership with Virginia Commonwealth University. And that's the beginning of our archaeology program. People have been very kind to me as I've been selling my goodbyes. and talking about me building. But the reality is that this is a group effort. I've always said archaeology is not a single person effort. The students from VCU have been wonderful. The interns that we hired to help support that field school have all been wonderful. I'm very proud of how many have gone on and are still in the profession. I see a couple of names out there tonight, and a couple of people have reached out to me in the last few days. I'm thrilled. I'm very proud, and I think this organization should feel very proud to see the development that's been cultivated through this particular program. I was asked not to focus on the Enchanted Castle, but we were supposed to look for evidence of the fort. In Washington, in its last couple of years, they actually found something that looked to be a very likely part of that original wooden fort structure. So we came in with the initial goal of finding that wooden structure. There's no spoiler anymore. You all know that we've been searching for years, and we've not really sort of get a real good handle on where the fort still lies. But the simple fact that we were doing archaeology outside of the house itself, Mary Washington had paid attention to the house, and there were many important questions that they needed to address with the house. Us, by moving away from the house, we've actually begun to ask different questions, and we've kind of taken I kind of sold as a landscape approach, and what we've learned about is a larger time depth rather than just focusing on a single structure. We've learned about how that landscape has been changed over time. That means our questions are going back further in time, and it's also coming further into the present, and to see how that landscape has been used over 300 years. Um, it's been a pretty exciting time. We've had some really great findings, and especially in the last 5 years with when Kelly's joined us, um, and so that we're asking different questions, and I think rather exciting questions. Um, when we talk about the peoples of Germanna, we have many more peoples that are part of the story, and archaeology is finding evidence of that, and that's actually been kind of an important sort of journey to realize that Germanna is bigger than we initially thought. It's more than just the Enchanted Castle. It's more than just Alexander Spotswood. I'm not. I don't want to belittle it, but it's also more than the Germans who were there, who were really there for just a very short time period before they were able to pick up and move on to lands of their own. And we cherish the stories of those Germans and the descendants, their journeys to today, to the present day, across the country. They've spread all over the place. They've in a way kind of like spread out, but then rejoined together back at Germanna, which is kind of exciting because there's still a presence in Germanna, and in fact, the work that we do is largely because of this organization of descendants who have come back and feel that this is important and have supported it. We're learning more and more about many more peoples of Germanna, but that's from the help of this organization. And so I appreciate that. I've appreciated the opportunity that I was given almost 11 years ago. I never dreamed that we would be, where we are today. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to my colleagues, my ex-colleagues now. It's hard to say, but my colleagues nonetheless, and let them share with you sort of the exciting things that have happened just this past summer. Thank you all. And that's it for me.
All right, thank you, Eric. I don't know if it feels good or bad that that is maybe the last time you'll have to tell that history, which I know you know so well. Um, so again, Eric, thank you for all the amazing things you have done for the archaeology program. Nobody knows how much you've done more than I do. And I am very hopeful that we'll continue to communicate and talk about Germana history in the future. All right, so with that, I'm going to pass this over to our field crew for this year. I have to apologize. Our assistant site director, Matt Guthrie, is in Japan right now and sent a video which I have been unable to load. So just know that Mac is enjoying themselves in Japan and a huge part of our team. All right, I think our first speaker is Percy Anderson. He is one of our field techs, and then after Percy, we will have George Piccinini Avery, who is another one of our field techs. All right, so Percy, are you ready?
There we go. Alrighty, let me share my screen. Yeah. Alrighty. Well, good evening, everyone. While I get this set up. As Kelly said, I'm Percy. I'm one of the field techs who have been working this season. And I'm going to share with you guys an update on one of our big projects this season, which is the ongoing excavations into the first Spotsylvania County Courthouse. So I know most of you guys are familiar with Germanna, but just in case, as a refresher, Site 44 OR 159 is what we call our courthouse site, and it is believed to be the location of the first Spotsylvania County Courthouse. The courthouse was originally completed in 1724 and was only in use for a very short period before being moved to Fredericksburg in 1732. It was first trenched and identified during salvage archaeology in the 1980s, which it was then given the delineation of the county courthouse. And in the past couple of years, Historic Germanna has been trying to go back and kind of solidify that conclusion. As we know, there was also a church, a jail, and an ordinary in that location as well. And so we want to kind of go back, get a better idea as to the life of this structure and confirm its identity as the county courthouse. So our goals. So far, this excavation has included going down to the historic clay floor in select areas at the site, as well as uncovering the south and the east wall. And going into this season, we've been trying to continue to define the edge of the courthouse's foundation, to excavate a probable destruction layer found at the courthouse, and to expand that initial excavation trench so we can resume excavations in the main floor plan of the courthouse safely. And so for our first update is, let me pause this real quick because otherwise it keeps going. We found the west wall. So the west wall currently consists of about 5 to 6 courses of schist. I'll show a video in a second, which is a 3D rendering that I took the other day that showcases the entire cross section. And so this is really exciting because this gives us 2 intact walls of this structure. That's going to be our south wall and our west wall. We have the remnants of the east wall, but right now it's mainly just a trench that could be a builder or robber's trench where it once stood. And we are still working on locating the north wall of the structure before we make any conclusions as to the floor plan of this building itself. However, finding this gives us a much better idea as to the overall shape. It was likely rectangular and of average size, if not on the skinnier side. And I'm going to go ahead and play this video so we can get a look at this wall together. From the top down, this is what it looks like. All of the extant rubble over here may be destruction rubble. This also may be matrix that was built up to support the weight of that stone foundation, as it's pretty significant. It doesn't go as far as the south wall, and it's also a little bit higher up stratigraphically, but it's really interesting. You can see all the courses of schist here. This is all dry laid schist. So this was a very impressive stone foundation. And that right now it's excavated down to about the historic floor. That's what I'm currently working on right now in this unit. And for our second update, speaking of the historic floor, is we have dug the burn layer. And the burn layer is a destruction layer that we refer to that's about 3 to 4 inches of mainly charcoal and ash with very little soil content. And this started as a small pocket but has become increasingly consistent across the site, which supports our hypothesis that this was a larger burn event rather than something like a hearth or a chimney. So this would be like the structure catching fire. And we're still asking the questions of when this happened. Did the structure burn before or after abandonment, as well as some discrepancies with the artifacts that we're finding. The majority of artifacts that we found this season have been located under this burn layer on what was likely the historic floor. We'll talk about that in a little bit when we discuss the artifacts that are coming out of the site this season. So this is a photo that I took. This was probably my second week of work, and my hands were just covered in charcoal. I looked like I had been in the mines for a while. All right. And this was also interesting because currently there's no existent record of the first Spotsylvania County Courthouse having been involved in a fire. So it is both very exciting and brings a lot more mystery into what the life of this building was. So for the really cool thing, we have found a lot of very cool artifacts this season, and a very surprising assortment of them. We've had tobacco pipes, possible wine, like glass tableware, wine bottles, and we've even had porcelain and utilitarian redware. So we have evidence of drinking and smoking and these very social activities happening in this building, which isn't something we would necessarily think of in the modern day as behaviors associated with the courthouse. But it's entirely possible that in 18th century society, these were regular activities that would have been happening at this kind of remote place for social gathering. So over here is some wine bottle bases. These are all bases, but this part is specifically referred to as the kick up as well, if you're interested, that were found on the courthouse floor with evidence of fire exposure. When exposed, glass turns this bluish color that you can see right here and on a couple of these pieces. This is very interesting because this tells us this artifact was involved in this burn event as well. And besides the very cool things, there have been some interesting developments in the amount of architectural artifacts that we're finding. In the past, we have found them, but they've been in very low quantities for a structure of this size. This is a pretty significant building. And we have found iron nails and window glass, slate and phyllite roofing tiles, the very rare but occasional handmade brick, as well as some window leads. But these are still coming in very, very low quantities, which is a little bit frustrating because we would love to get a better idea of, did this building have windows? And if so, how many? Was this entirely made out of stone, or was this a brick building or timber frame building on a stone foundation? So we're continuing to collect data to look at that and kind of find an explanation as to why we aren't finding as many of these architectural materials here. And there are just a couple of very, very cool finds that we've had that I wanted to highlight. So we're going to talk about those. So for our most whimsical one, in one of our more Eastern units this season, we found a jaw harp. These are really cool instruments. They come in both iron and copper. The one that we found was a copper alloy one. And these are an instrument that date back to Eurasia in the 12th and the 13th century. However, Mount Vernon cites existent advertisements in the Virginia Gazette that tell us that by the late 18th century, these would have become very widely available to just about anyone looking for a little entertainment. They are heavily associated with usage by enslaved individuals, as they were subsequently very influential in the development of early blues and country music. So that is something that we don't necessarily think about with the courthouse, is this was, a building that may have been or likely was built by enslaved individuals. And there also was still that presence from Spotswood's household that was coming down there as well. And so the way these worked is they had a lyre-shaped frame, and it is now non-existent. Either it broke before it was discarded or it just didn't survive. But it would have had a tongue, reed, or vibrator slotted in this small notch right here. And the frame is placed at the tip of the teeth, and the shape you make with your lips and the raising and lowering of the player's tongue creates different sizes and shapes in the mouth that influence the sound that's being produced. Breath is also added to give the jaw harp more of a bouncy sound rather than a flat one. And I kind of fell down a rabbit hole from here looking at people playing jaw harps on YouTube, which I encourage. It's very cool. And I've noticed that a lot of accomplished players will also use the way that they strum or flick the reed with their hand to influence the sound that's being produced. And so you get this illusion like you're strumming a guitar, but along the side of your face. And these are still in use today. Modern bluegrass and folk bands continue to use them, as well as people will use them to make kind of these manual techno synth sounds. Oh, unfortunately, the diagram isn't working. But And so overall, a very interesting artifact. We have, these social items of drinking and smoking, and now we also have these musical instruments and artifacts of entertainment that are happening here. And it speaks to kind of a very vibrant community that is happening at this structure. And for our flashiest item, just last week, I pulled out of the unit that I was working on what is potentially a sword grip. So here's a picture before excavation, during, and after. And you may or may not be able to tell, but this artifact mainly consists of a wooden core with this twisted brass wire very tightly wrapped around the core itself and secured on at least one end by a copper alloy band. And this is most likely a sword grip. We'll take a look at a couple other examples that led us to this conclusion. But this technique was actually fairly common because it created a textured hold for the wielder's grip to kind of give them a better grip on the sword itself. So there's an almost identical sword grip in the collection of Colonial Williamsburg. It's a wood grip wrapped in brass wire and stamped with brass ferrules. And the only difference between this French infantry sword and the one that we have at the courthouse, this uses a braided brass wire, while ours uses a twisted one. However, this can be attributed to stylistic differences in the maker and the decade. This is about 20 years after the life of the courthouse. British infantry, according to Colonial Williamsburg, used remarkably similar swords, making it entirely plausible that one of the members of the British colonial society could have brought a sword like this over to America. This is most likely what is called a small sword, a dress sword, or a gentleman's hunting sword. And so these are two examples right here. Dress swords were a very fashionable item that reached the height of their popularity among Western European gentlemen during the 1700s. And it doesn't look like it now, but this would have been a very flashy weapon. They were secured about mid-thigh on the left side of the body and were designed to be very visible through the folds of a gentleman's coat. So they often had precious metals and jewels on them and were used as a status symbol or a signal of wealth. And according to the Cleveland Museum of Art, most dress swords were only worn during formal or court events. So was this a formal event, say, like spending the day testifying or even presiding at court? This item is one of my favorites to come out of this season because I think this gives us the most evidence towards this site being the courthouse. This is an item of significant status and power, and it being found here along the west wall on the historic clay floor really speaks to this being a place of high status for a period of time, such as the first Spotsylvania County Courthouse. So these are just a couple of sources for the artifacts that I just talked about. I'll hand it back over to Kelly, and later on, if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Let me stop sharing my screen. Ooh, no, don't do that. There we go.
All right, thank you, Percy. That was excellent. George is up next. Are you ready, George?
I will be in a sec. I just have to share the PowerPoint on my screen.
Okay.
Okay. And I think, can you guys see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Excellent. So, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you all about another one of the major parts of the site that we have been excavating this season, which is the Gordon Outbuilding subfloor pit. So along with the Enchanted Castle and the Germans, in the 19th century, there was a plantation on the property owned by the Gordons. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit of background on this before diving into an overview of the pit's excavation, processing, and contents. If it'll let me, I don't know, it's not letting me go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay, so a little bit of background. Who were the Gordons? So James Gordon Jr. purchased the land upon which the ruins of the Enchanted Castle remained in 1797. He stayed there and he had some children. And by 1852, the Gordon family enslaved 36 people who were manumitted upon the death of James, which was his son, and Elizabeth, his daughter. They lived there in the house together. Right now, we are in the process of learning what happened on this land between the manumission of the enslaved in 1852 and the end of the Civil War. However, recent excavations near but not within the subfloor pit have bottles dated to the late 1860s and 1870s, which might help us build a better picture, although analysis is still in the preliminary stages. We know after the Civil War, white Gordons lived in the main house of the property, and we recently learned that they hired a black family as help and tenement farmers. So the subfloor pit that we're excavating is potentially associated with free or enslaved black families living on the property before or after the Civil War, although we are not completely sure of the situation at this time. So I've been saying subfloor pit a lot. What is a subfloor pit? So a lot of this comes from this excellent book by an archaeologist named Patricia Samford. Subfloor pits are a certain type of feature which commonly appears in African American dwelling sites, constituting flat bottom pits cut into the soil under the floor, or in the mid to late 19th century, occasionally outside of a house. During their lifetime, when they were in use, they could have functioned as root cellars for keeping veggies, as caches for stolen or valuable items, as storage for personal goods, or as spiritual spaces for constructing shrines. After falling out of use, right, when they were no longer people living in the structure, when the building was torn down, the occupants or other people would usually fill the pit with garbage. Now, what about our subfloor pit? At the end of the 2024 archaeology season, so last year, we discovered the top of a large rectangular subfloor pit feature in August of 2025, so at the beginning of this year, we began proper excavation of the feature itself. Let me tell you, we saw it. There was this stain in the ground there, and as soon as we all laid eyes on it at the beginning of the season, we were salivating over what could be in this thing. And these pictures on the right, these are just some pictures of what came out of one context in here. I mean, this thing has so much valuable information to us that will help us tell more about the people who lived on this site. And it was huge too, comparatively. The feature size ranges from about 6 by 4 feet wide to 2 feet deep. I'm a tall guy. I'm 6 feet tall. I can lay down in this thing. A collection of brick, schist, and cut stone roughly lined the interior southeast and west walls, while a post hole was dug to the immediate north, and that lies associated with the feature. So these are some pictures of the feature, of parts of the feature on the right side of the screen. How was this thing excavated? We started excavating the main body of the subfloor pit, which covered nearly the entirety of the unit, but we left a small pedestal in the southwest corner under 2 large schist slabs. That is this picture on the left here, which you can see these are the large schist slabs. One of them, this one, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but I'm hovering over it. The leftmost stone there has these really interesting cut marks into them. There's this kind of half circle and there's a square with a line going through it there. This is something which is of extreme interest to us. We don't know if this is associated with this building or if it was moved from another building and placed here. We're still trying to figure this out, but it is very, very curious to us. These pieces of rock were removed, and we recently excavated what was under there. We also took out the east and west flanks of the feature and their respective adjacent units. And on the east side, which I excavated, you guys can see this picture on the right side of the screen, which I've highlighted in red. We found the remains of a wooden retaining wall, we think. It appears to be just kind of this brown charcoal filled stain in this kind of clay ground here, but it was incredible. I'm swiping away at the ground here, and I'm like, wait a second, there's these little tiny flakes, and I stop immediately as I see it. I go, what is this? And it's wood. It's little pieces of wood, like as clear as day. about 2 feet under the ground, there's wood that's preserved here. Now, this is really rare if you know anything about archaeology. It's really unusual to find wood preserved that deep. But here it was, and it was lining the wall of this pit feature, and I'm kind of glad that it was there too, because I really wanted it to be a nice, neat rectangle, and it wasn't. But with this wall, it gives us a little more of a clearer shape. So we moved lastly to the south wall of this feature, and this has an irregular curved dip of fill in its profile on top of the subsoil. So this is what's be a little weird here. It takes this nice, neat kind of rectangular shape that we have going on here, and we haven't fully excavated it yet. So we don't know entirely what's going on. It's taken a while to excavate this feature. It's huge, like I've been saying, and we're really excited to see what remains in the last part of this feature here so that we can tell all of you guys and give it analysis to the public. Something really interesting to note is multiple archaeologists reported a strong smell of fish while excavating the feature across different parts of the pit. Was taking it, and Percy, who has a very sensitive sense of smell, my sense of smell is terrible, but he was saying, this feature, it smells like seafood. I'm like, oh, like no way. So I go over, I stick my nose in the dirt, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it totally does. At first I couldn't really smell it, but it was really in there. And I was digging in my side, and I was swiping away, and I got a little further down, and I there was a root in the way. I cut a root out of the way, and then all of a sudden the whole side of my feature, it smelled like fish. It was like, oh my gosh. And then when I was taking out these two large stone pieces, it smelled like fish again. And I mean, let me tell you, we found so many fish scales. You'll see there's a picture in the next guide, so many fish scales and so many fish bones. So to have a feature smell that strongly is really, really quite incredible, really quite unusual. So how are we processing these things? We take all of these artifacts out of the ground as we're digging, but how do we get to them? How do we find them? How do we sort them? How do we look at them? How is this thing processed? So over the course of excavations, we've created over 40 buckets of dirt and counting. That's at least 200 gallons of earth, right? We take these out in these Home Depot buckets, if you can imagine those. It's 40 of these things. That is probably enough to at least fill this living room that I'm sitting in right now. The floor, totally. We water screened each bucket of dirt. It's a feature. So we want to be able to find as many artifacts, as many little artifacts to tell us as much about this as we can. And let me tell you, we found fish scales, eggshells, beads, seeds, and pins. These are really, really tiny stuff. So it's important that we look through this as close as we can. On the right here, it's supposed to be a video. It wouldn't upload. I don't know if you guys can see it here. This is a video of Percy and I water screening. You can see us painstakingly. What we're doing there is we're picking through and finding every last little piece of eggshell and fish scale that we can. And we're putting them in this tray here. We also collected samples of the feature for flotation. And right now we are in the stages of washing, cataloging, and analyzing these artifacts. So next, I'm going to go over some pretty cool artifacts that we found here that I want to show off. This one on the right is very fun. This is a set of a fork, a knife, and a spoon. We have a full set of utensils. This is really cool. The fork, it is only a two-pronged fork as opposed to the three-pronged fork that we see commonly today. This was actually not too uncommon during this time period. What is interesting is that the handle here, I'm pretty sure, is made of antler, which is very, very cool. This artifact here with the X in it there, these are two halves of a dinner plate that we found together. We didn't find these associated with anything else that might give us any inkling into why it's like that or how it was used, but it's definitely a curiosity that we have that we are going to look further into. This is a piece of a stoneware jug that has some kind of lettering here in it and some kind of emblem etched into the top there. And down here on the bottom left is just an assortment of amazing ceramics that we pulled out here. My favorite one by far is this really beautiful hand painted flower motif in there. You can see, if you look in close, you can see the fine hairs of the brush stroke as they go across there. Some really, really interesting and beautiful ceramics. Up next, something very interesting is sewing materials and textile accessories. We found thread scissors in here. We found, oh my gosh, countless straight pins, buttons, copperback buttons, bone buttons. We found cufflinks. We found thimbles. We found at least 3 thimbles. We found belt buckles, and we found beads. I think we have at least 15 beads of different shapes and sizes and colors in here. This tells us that around the feature, there was some significant textile work that was happening. We can't say exactly what or who was doing this work, but this is significant evidence for textile work that was going on here. I like this cute little heart one that's pin that's down in the corner there. Something else, the other really most I don't want to say significant, but something that pops out when I think about this feature is the faunal and floral remains. Let me tell you guys, we have thousands of pieces of bone that came out of this thing. Thousands of pieces of bone that you can see. This is just a little sampling of them on the back there for many, many different animals. We know we have cow, we know we have like sheep, we know we have fish. We have so many different kinds of animals. This one on the right here you see is a turkey leg. It's a spur from a turkey. We have oyster shells that came out of here. We have fish scales, like I said. We have eggshells. Something else that was really interesting and really important to me to keep track of when we were water screening it was all the different botanical remains that came out of here. We have parts of peach pits. We have parts of walnuts that came out of here. We have seeds from many different kinds of plants that, frankly, I don't know what they are, but I know they're seeds. We have so much stuff here and in very, very large amounts. And this is important because this can give us some kind of insight into what the diet of the people on this site were, how they might have been using the land. It's important to note we're right by the Rapidan River. It's just a few hundred feet away from where we are. It would have been very accessible to whoever was living here at the time period. And the other stuff can give us some insight into potentially what they would have been doing, potentially animals that they might have had, or where they would have been sourcing this food is something that's very important to note. The last kind of artifact that I want to point out here is slate pencils and writing slate. In the feature, we found one slate pencil, and right adjacent to it, we found another. We've also found writing slate in adjacent context here. This is really, really cool stuff. If the subfloor pit is determined to have an association with free or enslaved Black families on site, it could suggest possible evidence for an instance of African American literacy in 19th century Virginia during the time period around this subfloor pit feature. We don't know enough to make any definitive claims at this point, but this is something that we are considering. Something else I mentioned earlier, there was an adjacent post hole to the site. We got some really cool artifacts there. To the immediate north of the subfloor pit, we excavated a post mold and a post hole. Inside of the post mold were several broken and overturned glass fruit jars. One with the writing Cohancy kind of molded in there, and the other with the hero. So the Cohancy bottle originated in New Jersey from the Cohancy Glass Manufacturing Company, and the latter originated in Philadelphia by the Hero Fruit Jar Company. Both were manufactured in the late 19th century, post-Civil War. And so this can give us some kind of insight into when the post hole was filled in, potentially when the structure was downed. Although, like I said, analysis is in preliminary stages, so we're not totally sure on everything here yet. But this is stuff that we're considering. It helps us potentially give a good date range for filling in the post hole and can inform its relation to the adjacent subfloor pit. This is cool because it can, like I was saying, with the food, give us insight into how people were potentially getting the fruit that would have been stored in these jars. They're not going to necessarily have to grow it themselves, although they could have, but they could bring it in because of industrial manufacturing that's happening in this time period, which is going to be different than if you were trying to get food in the early 18th century. So I want to bring up a comparison here. This is going to be the last slide with the subfloor pit that we excavated in the Southwest dependency. So from 2021 to 2023, Archaeologists Germanna excavated the Southwest dependency subfloor pit. Now, there are some very key similarities here, right? Sewing materials and accessories, thread, scissors, straight pins, beads, and buttons were found in both. A large assemblage of butchered faunal remains were found in both. Collections of broken eggshells, fish scales, and oyster shells were found in both. Charred botanicals, including full and partial peach pits, were found in both. Pipe stems and pipe bowls were found in both. Utilitarian stoneware and hand-painted porcelain were also found in both. Here you'll see a picture. This is a display case that was curated about some of these very cool artifacts that we found in the Southwest dependency pit. Now, some notable differences with the current pit versus the other one. The Southwest dependency pit contained a cowrie shell, suggesting the presence of an enslaved individual from West Africa. The Gordon era pit contains much higher quantities of faunal and botanical remains. The Southwest dependency pit housed a large skeleton key, implying whoever was in there had access to other places in the enchanted castle. The Gordon era pit contained a slate pencil, indicating to us the presence of literate workers on the site. Now, these are just some differences that we want to highlight. When I think about this, I think about, like I said, the difference between how you would get your food, right? If you are living in the 18th century working in the enchanted castle, and you have a peach pit there, that peach pit might have come from a peach orchard that Spotswood owned at this time period. But if you are living and working in the mid to late 19th century and you have a peach pit there, that potentially could have come from another source. People aren't going to be necessarily getting their produce locally if it could be shipped in glass jars. These are just things that we have to consider here. The other big change is the presence of literate workers on site. That is a very interesting possibility to consider, which we do not have evidence of in the 18th century. These are just things that we are considering at the time period. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them once the time becomes available. But until then, thank you all very much for listening, and I hope you learned something.
George, that was also excellent. It is so fun to see all of the artifacts that we found all at once. I feel like we had a really good year. Um, let's see. Let's see. I need to share my screen. Let me see. Screen sharing. Second. All right. Okay, there we go. All right, great. That was great, and I kind of wanted to jump on the bandwagon a little bit and show some cool artifacts too before I got into things that were a little bit more serious. So in addition to everything you heard from Percy and George, we also every year host the VCU Field School, which is great and wonderful. We love having those students here. And I just wanted to show a couple of the more interesting artifacts that they found this year. So these artifacts were found in 2 units that were about 20 feet apart. They are both hard rubber or vulcanized rubber and are stamped with Goodyear 1851, their patent mark. The comb on the right here, it's a lice comb. It is also marked with the letters IR, which signify the India Rubber Company. So the India Rubber Company used Goodyear's vulcanizing process to make hard rubber objects. And they were most well known for making these lice combs. The button on the left is marked with the letters NR. You can probably see that a little bit on the bottom there. NR stands for the Novelty Rubber Company, which also used the Goodyear vulcanizing process to make objects like these buttons. The comb and button both date to around the mid 1800s, so around the time of the Civil War, and they were in common use by soldiers during the war. However, neither of these artifacts were found in military contexts. They were actually found in domestic contexts and were likely being used by members of the Gordon household. Um, but kind of exciting, they both have the same patent mark there. The next artifact I want to highlight is this one on the bottom left. Both of these ceramics were found in a mixed context of artifacts. So there were artifacts dating to the 1700s, as well as artifacts dating to the 1800s. These two both date to the first half of the 1700s. The bottom one is an example of a tea grate or tea strainer on a teapot spout. So it would filter out all of those large chunks of tea leaves that you would not want to drink. It's an Asbury type of ceramic. The image on the right is an image of a complete teapot. One of our interns, Mary Madigan, actually researched and wrote about tea culture and teapots like this one. And we will be uploading her research to our blog soon. So if you're really interested, keep an eye on that. Okay, the next thing I'd like to talk about is an update on the work we have been doing with the funding we've received through Virginia's Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Historic Preservation Grant Fund program. So we call that the BIPOC grant. Our goals, we received that this year, and all of the work that we have been doing this year has been funded by this grant. So everything that Percy and George showed you, that's all being funded. And Percy and George and Mac, all of our workers and all of our work has been funded through this grant. Our goals when we received the funding were to, among other things, hire researchers to examine BIPOC histories at Germanna. We also wanted to hire additional staff and expand our archaeological investigations and focus those investigations on BIPOC resources. We also wanted to integrate the results from that research and archaeology into our interpretation and our educational program. So I'm going to go into each of those things in a little bit of detail. So one of the first things we did was to hire researchers. We hired Amber Miller in that image on the left. She is pictured with Ann Miller, who some of you who are watching may also know. Ann has also been a huge help with our research. Amber's focus has been to learn as much as we can about the people who were enslaved on the property during the first half of the 19th century and to follow them as they left Germanna. So we know, and I think George mentioned from previous research, that 36 members of Edie Gordon's enslaved family were emancipated in the 1850s and sent to Liberia. Amber's attempting to identify where others went locally and identify free towns in the Germanna area. So this research that she's doing supports efforts by UVA and the Orange County Historical Societies to locate and map free towns in Orange County and throughout Virginia. Rachel Meadows, pictured on the right here, is focusing on the Indigenous history of the Germanna region. She is working on creating a landing page for the Germanna website where she will present a summary of Indigenous history of the region. She is also in the process of completing oral history interviews with regional tribal members and will highlight those Indigenous voices. Those interviews will also focus on regional history and will also be available on the Germanna website. So Rachel and Amber are collaborating with local organizations to complete their research and make sure the research they are doing is beneficial to communities and organizations beyond Germanna. They are both doing excellent work. So the next goal, which was the primary goal of the grant funding, was to hire more archaeology staff so that we can dig more and try to discover and learn more about BIPOC resources associated with Germanna's properties. One, so this is kind of a list of some of the things we had in our mind where we might find those BIPOC resources. Percy was talking about the courthouse, and that may not seem like an obvious choice for BIPOC resources. However, most of the Indigenous history we currently know about is associated with the colonial town of Germanna, which included that courthouse site. In the 1980s, the University of Mary Washington completed a phase 1 survey of the property, during which they identified 3 sites potentially associated with people who were enslaved on the property. Those sites included a possible domestic quarter associated with the 18th century occupation of the property, a possible 19th century blacksmith site, and a domestic quarter associated with an 18th to 19th century milling complex, which is on the opposite side of the road, just behind the Hitt Archaeological Center, if you know our site. The last 2 George mentioned in his presentation. These 2 sites overlap physically. So the pit feature that George was talking about was part of the 1800s Gordon Yard. That area actually overlaps what would have been the location of the east dependencies of the Enchanted Castle. So, in George's presentation, you did not see images of the foundations for the east dependencies because we did not find any features related to the east dependencies of the Enchanted Castle. And I'll say yet, we haven't found those yet. Let's see. Oh, and this is just some artifacts that this on the left, we have an image of that pit kind of mid-excavation. Some of our field crew at the top there, including field school and interns and field techs. And then some of those images, I think George showed similar ones in his presentation. All right, so this kind of leads us to our final and one of, I think, the most important research goals that we have, and that is integrating the research that Amber and Rachel are doing and the results of our archaeological excavations into our interpretation and programming. So over the past 2 months, September and October, Germanna Archaeology has met with almost 300 students. So we have had the wonderful opportunity to work with 4th graders, 9th graders, and juniors and seniors from high school. We visited the entire 4th grade class of Locust Grove Elementary School. We showed them pictures of artifacts we've been finding and talked about what these artifacts can reveal to us about the experiences of people from the past. 2 archaeology classes from Loudoun County came to Germanna, and the students were able to wash artifacts collected from that pit feature that George was talking about. They were also able to dig STPs. Ninth graders from Fauquier County were also able to see and learn from artifacts that were being processed in the lab when they participated in one of our educational programs. We were able to show them the artifacts that had just come in from the field and have discussions with them about what it might mean that we found these artifacts and what those artifacts might be. So these were all real-time opportunities for us to talk about what these artifacts tell us about the experiences of people who were living at Germanna. These students were involved in the discovery process and learning about history as it came out of the ground. Not only were the students excited to be a part of this process, they were able to observe with their own eyes direct evidence of Virginia's Black history. And this was a very exciting and powerful thing to see. All right, so what is next? So we are still digging. We have a few more months to dig, during which we hope to find more significant BIPOC-related resources. There are 3 locations we would like to dig at that we haven't even begun to investigate yet. We will not get to all 3, but we should be able to make some progress on at least one of those additional locations. Amber and Rachel are continuing their research, and once they are finished, we will be able to use the results of that research to enhance the interpretation of our sites. This will give us a huge push forward in updating our literature and our exhibits. We will continue to collaborate with community partners and support research to create programming that is beneficial to our region. Those partners include organizations, but also individuals like yourselves. All of you who tuned in this evening who have an interest in what we are doing here at Germanna. And of course, the education, everything that we have done will go straight back into the education programs that we do. So those of you who tuned in this evening, you may have an interest in archaeology, local history, genealogy. Maybe there's just one person or one family who lived at Germanna that you have a connection or an interest in. And that is wonderful and amazing. So we at Germanna, in my mind, are doing this work for you, but we are also doing this work with you. And this may sound kind of corny, but in my mind, we are just part of one big team. Our major goals with this research and these investigations are that it will go directly back into the community. And we are really excited to see that. All right, I think that is it for me. Shannon, are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. There's one right now, but sometimes as we ask questions, more pop up. So we'll give some folks time to think about and have the information percolate because there's a lot of good stuff there. This is from a familiar to us person, Jackie Kyler, who's one of your volunteers. She's asking if there's any more information about the burn episode at the possible courthouse and if there are any written records about that.
So I'll answer the records part. There are no records of the courthouse burning. There are, which Jackie may know, records that the church that was in the town of Germanna burned. We have wondered, does this burn layer mean that we are digging in the church? So far, we haven't seen anything else that would suggest that this is the church, but that's certainly something we're keeping in mind. But no, the burn layer is a huge mystery, and we are hoping that by excavating more, we will kind of learn more about it and understand more how it relates to the structure. Percy, did you want to say anything? I know you were talking about the burn layer?
Um, I am trying to think if I have anything to add besides that. I think the only thing is I was basically digging it just last week, and the pieces that we're pulling out, I kind of want to just emphasize how little soil there is in it. And these are like large chunks of charcoal that are coming out of this layer. Especially when you get down to the floor, there's these large pieces of burned timber basically that are sitting on top of the floor. And then as you get higher up, it's smaller and smaller pieces of charcoal and ash. So that's just interesting. That can kind of tell us a little bit about how that fire might have progressed.
Percy, do you have any speculations? Like, this is just me asking you.
Yeah.
So do you have any theories about whether this burn was before or after it was moved to Fredericksburg? Do you have any idea
Sure.
about that?
So the part of me that loves historical drama would love for it to be before it was moved to Fredericksburg. As Kelly was talking about with the church, there was, I believe, some reference that the church may have been intentionally set on fire, so they were able to move it. The courthouse and the town of Germanna was located kind of in the middle of nowhere when Spotsylvania County was still a little bit of a frontier. So people didn't really like coming out at the time because it was such a long travel. And I would not be surprised if they harbored resentment that they had to come out and be at court in the middle of nowhere, basically. So part of me would love for it to be that it was another example of them intentionally burning down a building to move it. But I also come from working in Colonial Williamsburg, and there you become very well aware of how flammable historic buildings were. So it's also, I think, entirely possible that it just caught fire. We have some evidence that material was robbed out of the building afterwards, but that could also go either way. So I'm sorry, that's not very helpful of an answer.
No, I appreciate hearing your insight. I mean, it's also, I guess it's not a coincidence. Like you said, historic buildings are very flammable. You have the Enchanted Castle burning, you have this church burning, you have maybe the courthouse burning, then, like it's just that wood timber, just is meant for that.
Just
Uh,
to back up
yeah.
what Percy was saying there, people were very resentful about having to travel to Alexander Spotswood's house to go to court. Um, the court records continue pretty steadily until it's moved to Fredericksburg, which in my mind might suggest that there was no kind of burn episode before it was moved. They were still using the courthouse pretty regularly up until
hmm
then.
Yeah, those petitions are pretty funny how like they're just so sick of the traveling, which I get because I live in Fredericksburg and I do that drive every day. It's a little easier for me, but
Yeah.
I can imagine that get old real quick.
Yeah, do that on a horse every day.
Yeah, on a knot. Yeah.
Kelly, as I recall, and we've been working on the courthouse for a couple of seasons. Um, Higher up, we kind of found some artifacts that kind of corresponded with the late 18th century, kind of suggesting that there's activity around. So again, that's something maybe keep in mind that that building maybe still had a use life after the court days. We don't know what that may have been. They could have, you hear stories of buildings being used as stables or something like that after these use. But there's a chance that it had a little longer use life and then maybe burned at a later date because it wasn't significant. Maybe that wasn't written down or noted or so. I think that's something that sort of analysis is going to have to help us figure out and see what the artifacts tell us as to what is above and below that burn layer that might help us put a little bit of a date on it. But it's just interesting. I mean, that's to be determined still.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting. We have another question from Lisa, who I think is related to George. So, asking George, with all of the bones and the shells, it's surprising that they haven't decomposed by now, or is that why there's only fragments and pieces of them?
So, mom, to answer your question, really, it depends a lot on a couple of things. One, mainly, is the condition of the soil, right? how acidic the soil is going to depend on whether or not, especially organic materials, get preserved. You're also going to have to take into consideration like rainwater and erosion going into the ground, blasting that, right? Freeze and thaw cycles as well can do damage to organic materials, and just the microbes in the ground that are going to be eating stuff up. So, I mean, that is something to consider when you think about, oh, okay, why are some bones or shells in full condition or not? Surprisingly, shells, oyster shells specifically, can be pretty hardy. You can find oyster shells that are like hundreds, if not thousands of years old, depending on the preservation conditions. Here we found a decent amount of oyster shells. We have, gosh, I would say at least 20 in that feature. With the fishy smell, was there any evidence of salt preservative or anything? As far as I've seen, no. I don't quite know. I don't quite know how you would figure out the salinity content of it unless you sent the soil in for like phytochemical analysis, and even then, I don't know if that's something they're necessarily looking for. And have any clothes remnants been found, like any thread or anything like that? As far as I'm aware, where no, it's really, really quite rare that you're going to have like any kind of explicit textile preserved for that long. It can happen, but it requires extraordinary preservation conditions. So the stuff that we have, the straight pins, the buttons, the scissors, the thimbles, that is just more indicative of work being done with textiles as opposed to anything indicating, oh, yes, there was this shirt or dress or anything like that. We have not found evidence of clothing items specifically.
Actually, I think there was a thread attached to one of the buttons, but I feel like it disintegrated almost as soon as it came out of the ground.
You're
Yeah.
kidding. No way.
Yeah, it might have made it to the lab, but I don't think it lasted very long. Yeah, it was kind of impressive.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I don't see any other questions at this moment, but like Kelly and Eric and everyone has kind of asserted, we are working with you guys. So this is a team effort. So our archaeology team is very public facing and very open to these conversations and questions. So if you come up with another question, shoot it to our email and we'll get it answered. Otherwise, thank you everybody who's joined us tonight. Oh, Brandy, you're raising your hand. Let's see. Let's see if I can figure out allow to talk. Okay, Brandy, you are good to talk or show yourself.
Hello there. I just wanted to say hello and that I miss you guys. And thanks so much for continuing to educate us on the history of Germanna. Take care.
Thank you, Brandy.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Come out and visit us again.
Yes, ma'am. Bye bye.
Bye.
Yeah, so as you can see, yeah, we're a community. We have a lot of returning people in the audience today, and we're so appreciative of you all for tuning in. Again, thank you to our Sustainer Circle supporters for making programs like this and our whole archaeology program sustainable and continuing to thrive. And lastly, thank you, Eric, for all of you that you've done for Historic Germanna and even, staying beyond your last day to join tonight's call and add your insights. I'm sure we're all super grateful for you, and we're going to miss you immensely. All right. Well, that will conclude our program tonight. This is the last one we have scheduled for this year. But keep an eye out always on our website, social media for other events that are coming up. Have a good night, everybody.